going to try and be the positive part,
Yeah.
not the scary part.
And we're going to go fast because
We're going to go
fast.
fast, and we're a little behind, but we'll be quick. We just want to get some feedback from you. I'm going to give you some context, and then Heather's going to give you some details. I think all of you know that, so we're a state agency. We're the state's Commission for National Community Service. And while we help with Citizen Corps and support some of the disaster volunteer piece, our main function and what pays our bills is really running the state's AmeriCorps programs. And I know that, I'm sure you all have heard of AmeriCorps and VISTA and sort of the other national service streams, maybe Senior Corps as well, some of which is covered by our office, some of which is covered by federal employees in the state. You don't need to know all those sort of nuances of the structure. Just trust me when I say it's unnecessary bureaucracy, but that's, beside the point. But, so our main function is the AmeriCorps programs. And around the state, we have, in any given year, roughly 200 full-time members who are serving full-time in various organizations, schools, community organizations, whatever. And then we also have quite a few in the summer. So I think a lot of you sort of know that and have some familiarity with that. But the context that we're talking about is at the federal level. So a lot of our funding comes from a federal agency, which is the Corporation for National Community Service, which runs all these programs. And I think we talked at a Citizen Corps meeting probably a couple of years ago about the new FEMA Corps and how FEMA has an AmeriCorps team that can be deployed in federal disasters now. But there's definitely been sort of a movement to think about how we can use AmeriCorps members more locally during, and other national service members as well, more locally during disasters. Like I say, whether it's a state declaration or just a local event. So Heather's going to talk a little bit about that, but the corporation sort of is pushing this in a couple of different ways and through a couple of different streams, and we'll kind of get into that, but we're sort of ramping up what we think we can do at the state level, and then what we hope make available to you at the local level, and see how we can utilize those members. Like I say, a lot of this, for me, this conversation became more urgent, as I'm sure for a lot of people with the chemical spill, not just because we worked with Jenny quite a bit on what they needed, but also, many of our members wanted to be engaged, wanted to have things to do. Many of their schools were closed for a long period of time, and so were available and didn't have service to go to. So I think it's an underutilized resource that we're going to try and utilize more. So Heather's going to kind of go into some of the details. You've got a couple handouts about what the corporation does in terms of disaster response, and then she's going to sort of get into what we're going to try to do at the state level as well.
So I wanted to thank Al and Jenny because I feel like they set the stage perfectly with their presentations. Essentially, we've been seeing this trend where it's harder to get federal declarations, harder to get individual assistance, and then Jenny's been doing a great job getting, building the capacity of VOAD and getting all of the voluntary agencies sort of supported and resourced and connected. And so when we think about Volunteer West Virginia, we think, well, what is our role? What can we contribute to this big piece of the puzzle? And what it kind of comes down to is worker bees. You need people to do the work. And in order to effectively engage people during a response, you need them to be connected, have a structure in place, and be trained in advance. So that's where we feel like we come in with this program to build the capacity all over the state to respond to disasters, and this could be for any voluntary agencies, any local emergencies, any state emergencies, regardless of whether or not a federal declaration has come or will come. And so when I want to review really quickly some of the other national service resources, but what we've set up this year is something we're calling West Virginia Disaster Corps. And we essentially gave all of our full-time AmeriCorps members, as well as all of the VISTAs in the state, which is another added component, to the ability to opt in to this program where they can actually get credit on their service hours. They have to do 1,700 hours of service every year. So they can essentially take part of those 1,700 hours and count those hours if they're ever deployed for a response. They can also count those hours when they're in training. And we set a few, a little bit of a parameter around it because they still have to do whatever they're supposed to do with their service site, and they have to meet whatever community need they've been approved to meet. But this is kind of like if the thing happens, the flood, the tornado, the hurricane, the whatever it is happens, then they can be called, and we've put a structure in place so that you can call our office to mobilize these programs, these people. They are essentially individual resources. They're not, for instance, they don't come in teams necessarily. Now, some of them are in concentrated geographic areas, and they may be affiliated with the same program. So they might carpool, or they might come together, and we can work out all of those details with you depending on what the need is. Right now, this is the very beginning. So we kind of want to engage you in a conversation around what they could do for you. Like, how could you use people? And we're not quite at the point yet where we can send you a map of where all their locations are, but I think we've had a really good response. We had almost 110 people do applications, and then 70 people complete shelter fundamentals training in October. And we're following up with them with certificates, but also with additional information, some information on free online training they can take. And then next in the spring, we'll get them all together again and give them some additional training components. So that might be damage assessment, or it might be, I don't know what other things we talked about.
We talked about some components of the CERT.
Some components of CERT. We're trying to decide what they could best be utilized for, and what training might be, in their best interest. So we would love feedback on that.
And I would just add too, for Jenny and for anybody else who's interested, is this does not have to be the immediate response part.
Yeah.
This could be the long-term part.
Yeah.
So, that's somewhere where, we can think about that. If
Yeah.
that's where the need is for bodies, then that might be what we're looking at.
Yeah.
Like I said, we're just starting this. I think Heather's alluding to some of the trainings too, and obviously we're working closely with the Red Cross on this. Because they have a disaster volunteer system in place, it's sort of easy to plug into them, but we also want to develop the local relationships. And for those of you who already use CERT teams, and I know, again, we're sort of preaching to the choir a little bit, but for those of you who use CERT teams, if more bodies could be used or could be utilized, like I say, in the long-term recovery piece, we want to figure out what that looks like and how we set that up, and what you need to know, and what training they should have to make that possible.
So if you guys look at, there you have the handout that looks like this, but then you also have the one that kind of looks like this. And I'm going to skip a bunch of the stuff I was going to talk to you about, but if you go to this chart on the back page, I wanted to kind of show you where we fit into the National Service pie with this disaster corps program. So you'll see at the top under response, it says AmeriCorps State / National. That's us. We're AmeriCorps State. Okay, and some national, and some Vista, right. And then you have all the other National Service resources listed below, right? And there's a lot more information in the rest of the handout. So we can essentially facilitate you being able to engage any of these resources. So if you have questions later, or something comes up and you say, hey, I really need an NCCC team, then just call us and we'll tell you who to call and we'll figure it out. But essentially, this West Virginia Disaster Corps would be on this top line of the chart. And right now, their current capacity would be, they could certainly provide operations support as long as you can tell them what to do. So if you need somebody to sit at a desk in a warehouse and check in inventory and check out inventory, they could do that. If you need somebody to operate your shelter, they could do that. They have had shelter fundamentals at this point. They could certainly be given more information, but that is something they could do right now. And then certainly if you had a call center that we've kind of talked about different call center situations that might occur. They could certainly operate phones in a call center.
And we're working with Jenny to
Yeah.
help with WOAD having call centers when there's big concerns. And I know she got bombarded with phone calls during the chemical spill, and I think so that's one of the ways we were going to say that that's a very easy way for them to deploy. It's not sort of this 24/7 having to go, having to be available, but it's a very easy way to plug them in as needed.
Also, down in the recovery line, I sort of wanted to note the home construction and repair. We have a couple of programs that have expertise in this area. They do this all for their full year. They do historic renovations, and they do, we have a group working on the Twin Branch Recreation Area in McDowell County. They've pretty much signed up.
And we actually even have, there's some that work with the U.S. Forest Service, particularly in the Elkins area, and some of those, they have some fire training for the Forest Service. They have obviously a lot of sort of debris clearing and that kind of thing. So they've done some of that stuff already as part of their service.
So essentially what we've done is we've gotten these applications in for people who want to opt in. And then we've said, if something happens and someone needs to deploy you, we're going to call you. They can still opt out of it, but most of them have done an application because they want to do it. And they have these other, particular skill sets, which we've also assessed and created a database for. Things that we're looking at, I wanted to sort of point those out as well, and then maybe get your feedback on them. They could certainly do damage assessments. They could do door-to-door. They could do street sheets. They could do that for any agency. They could do that for local emergency management. They could do that for the Red Cross. They could do that for another agency that needs to collect that information for VOAD. They could do volunteer reception center support. So if we had a major emergency, you guys I'm sure have all heard volunteers as the disaster after the disaster. A lot of AmeriCorps teams already have experience in volunteer management, and this is something that we could give them training on. So this is something I feel confident that we could do with many of these members within, we could probably do it now if we had to, but if you give us 6 months, then we'll be a little better prepared. But I just wanted to kind of point this out and then ask you guys, what do you think? What ways do you see that your organization could potentially use this team of volunteers? It could be, like I said, they're individuals, so they could be called individually. They can be deployed locally within your county, within the neighboring counties, or if something major happened, then we would call them from around the state.
And I would just say, and that's sort of what we want to get from you is, where do you need bodies, and are there places where you need bodies? Short term, but over time, it could certainly be a big contribution of time. The other thing I was going to say is so we have a counterpart in each state. There's a state commission in pretty much every state, and there are some states that really have serious, engagement with both state and local emergency management, and that the members spend as much as 20% of their time responding to disasters, or 20% of their members have to be available for deployment a certain amount, and get utilized quite a bit. North Carolina does a lot, Iowa does a lot, particularly with their flooding, and so this is there's a lot of options. We could kind of grow this to a point where it's helpful, but we're also not trying to compete with CERT. We certainly would want that to be collaborative. So that's what we're hoping from you guys.
A question. Can I ask a question? For those that would travel to a certain county outside their area, what about financial support?
We're gonna, as this starts small, we're gonna worry about that. As it gets bigger, we're gonna figure that out. I think for now, the members know we have training dollars for members, and that covers their travel. So for short-term deployments, and like we say, we've kind of put some limits in terms of the total number of days that they could go and what that looks like. So from us, we're sort of trying to cap that at a reasonable amount for us that we can absorb. If it gets beyond that point, then we'll start, we'll be looking for those other options. But for now, that's our problem.
Okay.
And similarly, a lot of times people ask about housing, and so we'll have to figure that out. I think for those of you who are familiar with NCCC resources, which is the national teams that come in for 6 to 8 weeks, they can respond to disasters quickly, but they're teams of 8 to 12 people who come, and sometimes they just do community service projects for 6 to 8 weeks in a place. They came in for the Reaching the Summit initiative last year, but sometimes they do disaster response, and they have construction, and they have sort of training in a lot of these things. And for groups like that, a lot of times they expect housing to be secured for them, and sometimes it's a church basement, and sometimes they camp occasionally, but sometimes it's local people opening up houses or locations. There's a lot of different things. So from the perspective of, if it gets to that point where there's sort of a lot of lodging that's involved, we're going to kind of we're a little bit playing that by ear. I know that's always a big concern, and I know that we don't anticipate it growing beyond what we're sort of already doing for their training, but if it were, then we would sort of cross that bridge.
We've told the members that if they travel locally in their county or in the neighboring counties, that will help them with mileage. They have a process already in order to do that. And, you know, we have kind of pockets where there are large numbers. For instance, there are quite a few in the kind of Elkins area, that the National Forest area and sort of that pocket of the state. Quite a few in Charleston, quite a few down near McDowell. Beckley, there's quite a few in Beckley.
So I think in the beginning, we don't anticipate sending them far enough away where lodging becomes an issue. I think that's kind of where we are right now. But part of that, and those numbers vary from year to year, right? So we don't always have the same number of members in the same area. So that is a little bit of a challenge, but it's something that, you know, I think if we have a good system in place, we can make sure the local utilizers would know who's there and, you know, how far they can go. Fran?
Whenever I hear that question, I don't mean to be insulting to you, ma'am, but the gentleman that spoke earlier said more people are less prepared, more dependent, and has greater expectations. I sometimes think we in our agencies are the same way, that when we look at these types of programs, then what are you going to pay to get people here or into our areas, and what do you expect of us? And I think it's time that we start being creative in looking at our areas, because right now I'm thinking that if you have 5 people that would show up in Hardy County and needed gasoline, that we could get gasoline donated. We have hotels, motels that would probably split the cost of a room with you or even volunteer, but we have state parks all over the state that we may be able to look at housing some. We have one right there in Hardy County. That we need to look at our own communities creatively to see what can we do to help support such a program as this if they do need to be called into our community.
I think that's a great point, and I think, you know, that's certainly how we're kind of approaching this. That's why we don't want to let the who's going to pay for it stand in the way of kind of creating a system. And then, like I say, because AmeriCorps members are cover a pretty good chunk of the state. Now, you know, in a couple places there might only be 1 or 2, but they cover a good chunk of the state and could get, you know, if they're willing to travel a little bit, could get pretty far without necessarily incurring a lot of lodging costs or demands. And that's part of it. You know, that's part of why at the local and state level we think there's an argument for this. There are a lot of resources that can be brought in nationally in a federal disaster, and yet that's not often what we need. So, you know, I think that's a good point. But I think, and we're committed to helping with that process, whatever that looks like.
No, I stop and think we have a wonderful 4-H camp that has like 200 people.
And we would ask you those questions. So if it was a big deal and you called us and you said, we need like 20 people and they're going to be here for 2 weeks because they're going to muck out homes and it's a serious thing, you know, we would ask you questions. Is there anywhere that could house 20 people? Is there anywhere that would donate gasoline? Is there anywhere that would donate food?
Or at
And you
least
would be our conduit to those.
Well,
those
we have a
things.
local food line, and I just found out that anything that's dated in their store, they take it out, and the next day it's available to programs or projects that are going on that can utilize that food.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of things that we're doing already. We may not know about them like that, but that we can inventory ourselves. I was thinking of our local hotel or motel, and I'm sure there's a hotel motel organization in the state that they belong to. It may be a regional organization that this type of a program could be presented to them, and in the event of something happening, how many of you would be willing to, you know, donate so many rooms for so much time and work out some kind of agreement with your program. Anyway, just
Thank you. So what other thoughts or questions do you have?
Or recommendations for training that if we delivered it to these members, that it would be the most helpful to you. I mean, you know, like I say, we're kind of looking at a couple different types of training, but we're open to suggestions.
Are you only going to utilize them during disasters, or do you have groups that could be trained to utilize in preparation for disasters? Such as the Smoke Alarm Project, for instance.
We're not so much looking at that right now. I will say a couple things. We have had programs that have, I think, you know, Red Cross has had AmeriCorps programs on and off, and also has members through other programs as a site. periodically, and that's definitely something that we're open to. For this particular group, I don't know that that's our main function. I will say that we've been talking to Homeland Security a bit and DMAPs and sort of talking about utilizing them in exercises, because I think that's a place where sometimes you need bodies and have a hard time getting them, and that they would feel like they're putting their training to use some. So we've been talking about potentially an exercise in the spring that would utilize some of them. So that's a place.
How's that request for employment made? Is that made locally or through the state?
Well, it's a good question. I think there's a couple of different ways that we're looking at. You know, we'll be in contact with Jenny. We're always in contact with Jenny when things are going on. We're also, and as you know, Jenny's always, you know, has a seat at the state EOC when that happens, when there's a state disaster. But you know, like I say, we have them plugged into the Red Cross system right now. So if you're using the Red Cross system, and they would be available through the Red Cross process. But we also want to make, like I say, we want to make members available in whatever way is most useful. So if that's not the most useful way, or if it's, you know, a month after the fact and there's still mucking out to do or those kind of things, we would want you to contact our office.
I'm just,
And Heather's putting up the information right now.
when you're talking about training, at the national level for people, do they have a recommended training curriculum of any kind from the community organization, this Corporation of National and Community Service?
It's a good question. I don't know that they have an official protocol for, you know, sort of the average AmeriCorps state members. Like I say, they have the FEMA Corps. They have sort of these very particular groups that are dedicated to disaster response all of the time, where there's some more specific training. I do think that that's something that's being worked on in terms of thinking about it, but I also think we want to be respectful of the fact that it's not the same from one community to the next. And so whether there are national recommendations that may or may not fit.
Because just looking at the CERT curriculum, guys, when you look at the CERT curriculum of what is involved in those 9 modules that they're taught, I would think that that information would be valuable to any volunteer working in any volunteer capacity. Because you get your team building training, you get your first aid and CPR training, which you may need in any situation. You get training on how to, the chain of command, you know, where you are and the importance of you following that chain, whether you call it names or just chain of command. And then you look at all the different disaster situations that you may get in, how to protect yourself, how to help protect other people. They don't have to be called CERT.
Right.
You could just use that
Right.
as a starting point to get basic training and adjust that program to meet your needs, but I think it would be a good training course to start with.
And I think that's something that we're looking at. I don't know if we have the capacity this year to deliver the whole thing to all of them, just because that's not sort of the time expectations that we've set up for them. But I do think we've talked about peeling out a couple of the modules. A lot of them have first aid and CPR already in many of their programs because it's relevant, or because they're in the schools or in the Forest Service and they get some of that already. So they do have some of that. But no, we're definitely looking at some portion of the CERT, if not all, down the road. Because that seems to be pretty.
The command and control section of that is very important. So we can plug them in wherever we need them, they understand their role and who they report to, and that's huge. I know instances in the past where, such as New York State, where they had major fire up there, they had assets showing up, and then on the way to where they were going, they just kind of peeled off their own thing. Not necessarily, not AmeriCorps.
Right.
Entities in
Right.
there.
No,
And it become an issue, and losing people, people missing and whatnot, it becomes a real major problem. You already got a problem.
sure,
There's no sense of compounding the problem.
absolutely.
So you have an evaluation in your form, and if you guys could think about it throughout lunch, and if you have ideas, training suggestions, thoughts about ways that you could potentially use AmeriCorps volunteers during a disaster that you've maybe noted in the past that you needed extra people.
Or if you have exercises that are coming up that might make some sense.
Sure. Yeah. And anything else too, but if you could just think about it throughout lunch and write all that stuff down in your evaluation.
It's on the right side of
Yeah.
your folder. How soon will it be available?
It's available now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we've already had 70 people train in shelter fundamentals. We have all their information. We can contact them. We have a structure. So it'll take us some time to build up training components, and then of course they'll switch over next year, so we'll have to start over again. But we're committed to do that, and some of them will stay. So some, AmeriCorps members, they might opt into a second year. So if they're here for the first time this year, then that subsection will have the training from this year plus the training from next year. So it'll build leadership capabilities. It'll build like a resource that has a body of knowledge around disaster response, and I'm hopeful that it'll be a benefit to all of you and to the state.
And I think, yeah, and we'll look at the training timelines too, because it's also something that I think as much as we can do on the front end of their service and have them available
Yeah.
for the remainder of the year is kind of our goal. It just, this is kind of the pilot year, and we're
Yeah.
sorting through what needs to happen.
I look at the needs assessment piece there, and I could see where that would be a great help to some of the counties in my
Mhm.
region of the state,
Yeah.
because we don't have time to go out and spend knocking on doors.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Meeting with organizations and getting feedback on
Right.
what they feel they need in their own little pocket in
Yeah.
our county, and I can see where that would be a powerful.
I think damage assessment we've been talking about that a lot, and I personally think it would be really helpful in a lot of cases, but, it could be something else that's more helpful, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to fit everything in because we only have them 2 times a year all together, so we're just trying to think about what the top needs would be.
If I can give AmeriCorps as a whole kudos, I've been out on several major western wildfires.
Mhm.
I've had them on my crews, and they are quick to learn.
Yeah.
They remember what they've learned, and they use it, and when they pay attention, they do a good job. And that's
awesome.
the people that run this program, I'm sure,
Mhm.
and they're motivated individuals. They do a good job.
That's true.
We're
Thank
glad to
you.
hear that. We might quote you on that occasionally.
We didn't talk about the ADART, but you guys can refer to it in the handout. ADART is a series of specialized AmeriCorps teams around the country. They have specialties in different things, and they can be deployable on a mission assignment from FEMA. So if there is ever a large event and there's a disaster and you're thinking, man, we really need a team of people who knows how to run chainsaws. I'm not sure what all their specialty areas are, but we can help you deploy those resources as well, so keep that in
Well,
mind.
speaking about the chainsaw subject, when we got the email from her, my response to her was, we have a lot of people that make livings running chainsaws, okay? The only ones I can think of that are trained are in the forestry industry, and I don't know that it's a national or a state curriculum that they use to train them. And this may be a topic we want to look at. We look at ATV training, we look at teen training, and all those kids that go out to the woods with their dads, that might be something we might think about. And across the state is, where would you go get a sanctioned chainsaw training class?
That's a good question.
The Southern Math District, which is one of the MOPAD agencies, does a certified chainsaw training, and we're in the process of setting that up in a few areas of the state right now.
Ooh,
I think that's wonderful.
that's awesome.
As soon as we get it, I'm working with Gina, that's why we have a balance, and
Yeah.
as soon as we do, we'll be getting that information out.
Thank you, Jenny.
That's works.
Yeah.
All right.
I think they will.
We're gonna let you eat.
So I know that we are all waiting eagerly for lunch. So Gina, do we have anything before they grab food? Okay, thank you everybody, and thanks for coming.
We appreciate it. Enjoy. Please do
Have
your
some lunch.
evaluations and yes, give them to us. Thank you.
We'll have CERT program manager chat discussion right